Hugh Hefner's story is one of glamour, power, and controversy, but behind the lights, cameras, and the fantasy world he built, there were shadows that followed him all his life. Many people only saw the image of the man in silk pajamas surrounded by women, but few realized the secrets he kept hidden, the pain he carried from his youth, and the darker truths that came out long after his death. He was born Hugh Marston Hefner on April 9, 1926, in Chicago, Illinois. His childhood shaped everything he would later become. His parents were strict Methodists who avoided affection, believed movies were sinful, and kept a home filled with rules. For a young boy, that kind of cold upbringing created deep loneliness. He later admitted that because he never felt warmth in his family, he grew up craving freedom, passion, and emotional connection. Even as a child, he started drawing pictures of women in ways that shocked his parents. He didn't know it then, but those drawings were the first steps toward the empire he would build. Hefner's intelligence was clear from an early age. His IQ was 152, but he wasn't a great student. His grades were only average, yet his imagination and creativity were far above the rest. At school, he began writing comic books with himself as the hero, escaping into adventures he could only dream about. When he was 16, a girl named Betty broke his heart, and that pain transformed him. He reinvented himself completely, changing his name to Hef, dressing differently, and creating a comic called School Days based on his life. For the first time, he used heartbreak as fuel for his creativity, something he would keep doing throughout his career. At Steinmetz High School, he kept pushing forward. He launched the school newspaper called the Steinmetz Trumpet in 1943, serving as a cartoonist and reporter, mixing humor with stories that gave him a voice. He sang in the school band, joined the student council, and placed himself at the center of everything. Even decades later, he never forgot that time in his life. In 2010, when he was already an old man, he donated money so the school's paper could be printed in color. He even stepped in again in 2016 when students faced censorship issues. For him, that connection to his school years stayed strong until the very end. In 1944, at the age of 18, Hefner joined the U.S. Army during World War II. He trained at Fort Hood in Texas and earned a sharpshooter badge with his M1 rifle. But instead of being sent to the front lines, his strong typing skills gave him a desk job in Maryland. He later said it was a lucky break. Instead of fighting and possibly dying overseas, he spent his service years chasing women in Washington, D.C., and drawing cartoons for Army newsletters. He believed those quiet years allowed him to hold on to his creative spark. If he had gone into combat, he thought Playboy might never have been created. After leaving the Army in 1946, Hefner went to the University of Illinois. He studied psychology, with minors in creative writing and art, and completed his degree in just 2.5 years. While there, he became editor of the campus humor magazine Shaft and introduced a new feature called Co-Ed of the Month. It was a risky move that gave a glimpse of the kind of boldness he would later bring to Playboy. He briefly attended Northwestern University for graduate school in 1949, but left after writing a paper criticizing America's sex laws. He wanted to challenge society, not simply follow rules. Around the same time, he studied art at the Chicago Art Institute, blending his love for words with visuals. In 1952, Hefner was working at Esquire magazine, earning $60 a week. He asked for a $5 raise, but when they refused, he quit. That decision changed his life forever. He mortgaged his furniture for $600, raised $8,000 from 45 investors, and even received $1,000 from his mother, who didn't believe in his dream but supported him anyway. His first idea was to name the magazine Stag Party, but legal threats forced him to change it. He chose Playboy. The first issue was created in his small kitchen in Chicago. When it was released in December 1953, it didn't even have a date because Hefner wasn't sure there would ever be a second issue. The highlight of the magazine was a nude photo of Marilyn Monroe, bought for just $500. The picture had been taken years before she was famous, and Monroe herself never worked with Playboy or even met Hefner. But that single image became iconic and sold nearly 54,000 copies at 50 cents each. Alongside the photos, Hefner included jazz articles, sports coverage, and even a Sherlock Holmes story. It was his way of telling the world that Playboy wasn't just about sex, it was about culture, imagination, and freedom. Today, original copies of that first issue are worth over $100,000. Playboy grew quickly. Major writers like Ray Bradbury contributed stories, and in 1955 Hefner published a piece that flipped social norms by showing a world where heterosexuals were discriminated against. The story caused outrage, but Hefner defended it. That same year, he gave comedian Dick Gregory his first big break, hiring him to perform after seeing him in Chicago. By then, Playboy was selling 100,000 copies a month. But success didn't come without battles. The U.S. Postal Service tried to ban the magazine in 1955, calling it obscene. Hefner fought back in court and won, securing his right to publish and opening the door for Playboy's expansion into full color. By the 1960s, Playboy was everywhere. Even stars like John Lennon and Vladimir Nabokov contributed. In 1959, Hefner launched a TV show called Playboy's Penthouse. It looked like a sophisticated party in his apartment, complete with jazz music, interviews, and celebrities like Sammy Davis Jr. and Ella Fitzgerald. The show was groundbreaking for featuring black and white guests socializing together at a time when racism was still deeply entrenched in America. Many Southern stations refused to air it, but Hefner didn't back down. The Playboy lifestyle was becoming a national phenomenon. In 1960, he opened the first Playboy Club in Chicago, where guests needed a special key to enter. Waitresses dressed as bunnies became world-famous symbols of the brand. But behind the glamour, strict rules forced the women to maintain certain body weights and looks, or else they were punished. Within 3 months, over 132,000 people had visited the club. Soon, Playboy clubs spread around the world, from London to Jamaica. At the same time, Hefner began publishing a long essay series called The Playboy Philosophy from 1962 to 1965. Across 250,000 words, he wrote about free speech, abortion rights, and sex laws. Supporters saw him as a defender of personal freedom, but critics, especially feminists, accused him of dressing up the exploitation of women with intellectual arguments. By 1964, Playboy went public and was worth $120 million, with Hefner still controlling most of it. That same year, he bought a 70-room mansion in Chicago for $370,000. It was filled with secret tunnels, mirrored rooms, and a pool with a waterfall entrance. He threw wild parties there, but years later, many women came forward claiming they had been drugged, abused, or even secretly filmed. Investigations and documentaries released decades later revealed that Playboy wasn't just about parties, it was about power and control. In 1971, Hefner moved into the famous Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles, buying it for just over $1 million. With a zoo, waterfalls, and the infamous grotto, it became a place of legend. Celebrities like Mick Jagger and Warren Beatty attended regularly. But once again, darker stories began to surface. Some women said they were pressured into things they didn't want, and hidden cameras were rumored to record everything. By the 2020s, lawsuits and memoirs exposed many of these claims. Hefner's personal life was equally complicated. He married his first wife, Millie Williams, in 1949. He had saved himself for her, but when she admitted to having an affair while he was in the army, it devastated him. Their marriage survived for a decade, producing 2 children, Christy and David, but ended in divorce in 1959. After that, Hefner embraced a lifestyle of excess, claiming to have been with more than 1,000 women. In 1968, he began a long relationship with Barbie Benton, who helped him purchase the Los Angeles mansion. They stayed together until 1976, but his constant affairs ended it. Even so, she later said those years were some of the happiest of her life. In 1985, Hefner suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. It forced him to slow down and re-evaluate his life. In 1989, he married again, this time to Kimberly Conrad, a Playmate of the Year who was 36 years younger than him. They had 2 sons, Marston and Cooper. But by the late 1990s, they were living separately, and their divorce wasn't finalized until 2010. In 2012, Hefner married for the last time, tying the knot with Crystal Harris on New Year's Eve. He was 86, and she was 26. They had met at a Halloween party in 2008, and she eventually moved into the mansion. Years later, in her memoir, she revealed difficult truths about what life with Hefner was really like, including controlling rules and emotional struggles. When Hugh Hefner died in 2017 at the age of 91, the world remembered him as the man who built an empire around sex, freedom, and entertainment. But as more women came forward, and hidden secrets from the Playboy Mansion basement were exposed, his legacy became darker and more complex. Lawsuits revealed hidden cameras, recordings, and control tactics that haunted many who had once been part of his world. What seemed like glamorous parties often hid manipulation and crimes that would stain his name forever. Hefner's story is not just about success and influence, it's also about the cost of power, the illusion of freedom, and the secrets that refused to stay buried even after his death. She said she always felt trapped, like she was living in a cage where everything she did was controlled by him. The rules were endless. He told her what clothes to wear, how her hair should look, what color of nail polish she was allowed to use, and even how much she should weigh. If her roots started showing, she had to bleach her hair immediately. If she gained a few pounds, she would face criticism. Even though she was an adult, she lived under a strict curfew like a teenager. What should have been a marriage turned into something cold and robotic. By 2014, she said intimacy between them had become almost non-existent, and when it happened, it felt mechanical instead of loving. The mansion itself, once seen as glamorous and exciting, was falling apart. The walls were filled with mold, birds lived inside, and the place was cluttered with old junk he refused to throw away. They had broken off their engagement once in 2011, but got back together. In the end, when he died, she was left with nothing because she had been written out of his will. That marriage, instead of showing romance, revealed a darker side of Hefner's life, one built around control rather than love. But even darker stories existed long before that. In 1975, tragedy struck when Bobby R. Steen, Hefner's longtime secretary, died by suicide in a Chicago hotel at the age of only 34. At the time, federal authorities were investigating Playboy for drug connections. Bobby was facing 15 years in prison for helping transport cocaine. Hefner claimed the charges were meant to pressure her into turning against him. He called it nothing but a witch hunt. But the case dragged the Playboy name through the mud. Newspapers were filled with stories about drugs and wild parties inside the mansions. It wasn't the first loss. Just 2 years earlier, in 1973, another woman named Adrienne Pollock had died of an overdose. The glossy image Playboy had built was beginning to show cracks. Then, in 1980, came one of the most haunting events in Playboy history. Dorothy Stratton, a young model who had just been named Playmate of the Year, was murdered by her jealous husband. She was only 20 years old. People accused Hefner of putting her in harm's way, saying the culture he created had placed her in danger. The scandal grew worse when Hefner published nude photos of her after her death without the family's permission. Her mother and sister sued, furious at how she was exploited even in death. Her boyfriend at the time, director Peter Bogdanovic, wrote a book placing heavy blame on Hefner and the Playboy world, accusing them of creating the circumstances that led to her tragic end. From that point forward, the fantasy Playboy had sold seemed less like a dream and more like a nightmare. The 1980s brought even more troubling stories. Multiple women accused Hefner of assault, some saying it happened when they were underage. Many of these incidents allegedly involved drugs. His former girlfriend Crystal claimed he kept thousands of compromising photos and that after his death she destroyed many of them. One of his former valets even said Hefner had assaulted a woman while she slept. Twin sisters who once lived at the mansion revealed that he refused to use protection and that one of them became pregnant because of it. The once glamorous mansion now appeared to be a house of pain. One of the strangest and darkest chapters was tied to his personal doctor, Mark Sagenor. During the 1970s and 1980s, the doctor was accused of running hidden homes known as shadow mansions. These were places where women were promised careers and fame, but instead were pulled into parties and encounters that were anything but glamorous. Sagenor's own daughter later said what happened in those places was dark and predatory. Some even suggested that Hefner and Sagenor's friendship went far beyond medical advice. Rumors swirled that these shadow mansions were used for illegal videos and abuse. The truth started surfacing when federal drug investigations in the 1980s uncovered disturbing details. The mansion itself told a story of decay and secrets. When Hefner bought the Gothic-style house in 1971, he turned it into the most famous party spot in Hollywood. It had waterfalls, hot tubs, secret passageways, and even its own zoo. By the 1980s, it had gyms, tanning beds, and rooms designed purely for fantasy. But after decades of heavy use, the place was falling apart. In 2016, Hefner sold the mansion for $100 million to a neighbor who agreed that Hefner could live there until his death the following year. The man who once hosted glittering nights filled with celebrities was now confined to a crumbling house he could barely leave. Back in Playboy's glory days, the magazine reached incredible success. In November 1972, it sold over 7 million copies in 1 month, a record that stood for years. Even politics couldn't escape its pages. In 1976, presidential candidate Jimmy Carter admitted in a Playboy interview that he had committed adultery in his heart, which nearly ruined his campaign but boosted magazine sales. Hefner had built a brand that wasn't just about photos but also long interviews with world figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lennon. Playboy seemed unstoppable. He even tried to expand beyond magazines. In 1971, he launched Playboy Records, where his girlfriend Barbie Benton recorded songs. One track, Show and Tell, became a big hit in 1974. He also opened casinos, including one in Atlantic City in 1981, but by 1984 the casino collapsed after he was denied a gaming license due to past bribery accusations. That failure marked the start of Playboy's decline. By the 1990s, magazine sales were falling fast. Under his daughter Christie's leadership, Playboy went digital early. In 1994, Playboy.com launched, and the following year they introduced the Cyber Club with videos and chats. In 2011, they even offered the entire magazine archive on iPad, cleverly avoiding Apple's strict content rules. Christie had seen the future of the internet and helped Playboy survive during a time when print was dying. In 1988, she had officially become CEO, and Hefner stepped back, focusing more on being the creative face of the brand. Still, Hefner found a way back into the spotlight in the 2000s with a reality show called The Girls Next Door, which followed life inside the mansion with his 3 girlfriends Holly, Bridget, and Kendra. The show ran for 6 seasons and made him popular with a younger generation. Millions watched it every week, but many of the women later revealed that behind the cameras, things were not as glamorous as they appeared. They spoke about control, rules, and manipulation. Health scares also haunted him. In 1985, at 59 years old, he suffered a stroke. He said the stress had been made worse by a book written about Dorothy Stratton's murder. Afterward, he sold his luxury private jet, the famous Big Bunny, which he had purchased in 1969 for $5.5 million. The jet had a disco area, cinema, and room for 16 passengers. Painted black with a glowing Playboy bunny logo, it was a flying party palace. Selling it was supposed to mark the beginning of a healthier lifestyle. He quit smoking and said he was slowing down. But in truth, even into his 80s, he was still throwing parties and using Viagra, which he once said had changed his life by allowing him to continue his lifestyle. By the 2010s, the Playboy empire was falling apart. Casinos had closed, magazine sales were dropping, and the mansion itself was deteriorating. In 2016, whispers grew louder about Hefner's health. Some said he was suffering from dementia. The mansion was sold under a strange deal where the new owner allowed Hefner to remain living there until his death. For many, this showed just how weak he had become. The man who had once been everywhere now rarely left his bedroom. On September 27, 2017, Hugh Hefner died at the age of 91 from an infection that turned into sepsis. His death marked the end of an era. Yet the story of his burial shocked people even more. Back in 1992, he had bought the crypt space next to Marilyn Monroe for $75,000. She had been the face of his very first magazine issue in 1953, featured without her consent. Hefner had never met her, but he was obsessed with her image. Being buried next to her disturbed many people, who said it was his final act of objectifying her. His funeral was private, and he was buried in a closed casket, but his decision tied his legacy forever to a woman who never agreed to be part of it. Even after his death, scandals refused to fade. In 2022, the documentary series Secrets of Playboy revealed shocking claims. It said Hefner faked illnesses to keep women from leaving him. His third wife, Crystal Harris, wrote in her 2024 memoir that he pretended to have hearing problems and back pain to make her stay by his side. She said she suffered from Lyme disease and mold poisoning during their marriage but still had to follow his strict rules. Other women supported her story, saying Hefner used guilt as a weapon to control them. At the same time, more lawsuits piled up. Former girlfriends and playmates accused him of recording them without their knowledge. Staff described how hidden cameras had been placed throughout the mansion, from bedrooms to gyms. A valet revealed stories of pig nights, where sex workers were filmed without consent while Hefner sat smoking and laughing at the screens. By 2022, over 10 lawsuits had been filed against his estate, with women saying they had been assaulted, recorded, or drugged. Many of these cases ended in private settlements, but the damage to his reputation was permanent. The mansion itself had always been full of secrets. Originally built in 1927, it already had hidden vaults and tunnels left over from Prohibition. Hefner expanded these underground spaces, adding gyms, bedrooms, and even connecting tunnels that staff used to avoid being seen. Rumors spread that some tunnels even reached the homes of stars like Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty, though many were closed off by 1989. Hidden vaults in the basement held more than 1,000 tapes, some dating back to the 1970s. Many believed Hefner used them to control or blackmail celebrities. After Hefner's death, the vaults and tapes became evidence in lawsuits, and the basement was revealed to be more than a party space, it was a storage for crimes. What was once celebrated as glamorous was now exposed as sinister. The man who had built an empire on fantasies of freedom and pleasure was, in the end, remembered for control, manipulation, and secrets buried deep beneath the mansion walls.